Okay, so welcome to our 193rd Reading Online Sports Economics Seminar. We are hosted by the University of Reading. We are sponsored by the Sports Economics Review. Excuse me, and our speaker today is one of the two editors of the Sports Economics Review, Alex Krumer. Alex is going to be in a moment presenting his very recent paper, Religion, Football and Reconciliation, Evidence from Israel. Before that, just to mention a few upcoming deadlines. Frank says that the Southern's deadline is tomorrow for submissions, and that'll be in Tampa. I'm not sure when. Frank, what's the date for that conference?
November 22 to 24.
November 22nd to 24th. And so if you want to submit to that, have a look out for that. Deadline is tomorrow, but there's possibly a bit of wiggle room there if you submit it a little bit late. Other deadlines coming up very soon are on the we've got it March the 31st. There's a deadline for the second workshop on sports economics and natural experiments at the University of Zurich, and also for the 11th Football and Finance Conference taking place in Duisburg. That's going to be on the 6th and 7th of May in Duisburg, followed by the 19th Gijón Conference on Sports Economics. That submission deadline is April the 1st, so also coming up very soon. So do submit papers to those conferences, and I hope to see a bunch of you in Duisburg and in Gijón, because I will, and Zurich for that matter, because I will hopefully be at all three of those conferences. But I don't want to take any more of Alex's time. Alex, please do take away your presentation.
So thank you very much. I will now share my screen with you guys. And first of all, I would like to thank James for the opportunity to be the proud sponsor of Rose's seminar. And this is my call for you to submit papers. We promise very fast procedure. So as you can see, the median time for the first decision, whether this is desk reject or send out to reviewers, is 1 day. Then review time is 44 days. We are in the process of getting into Scopus and into impact factor. So please submit if you have sports economics related papers. And now let's go to the presentation. So let's see. Okay, can you see it?
Yep, got that.
Great. Let me put you here. So now I'm fine. Okay, good. So again, thank you very much for inviting me to present this paper. This is a new paper and a joint paper with Andrew Musau from Molde University College. It's about religion, it's about football, and it's about Israel. So let's see. And by the way, any comment is more than welcome during the presentation as usual. So let's start with the religion, and I want to divide this talk into several parts. And in the beginning, I will talk about kind of economics of religion, why it's important. Then we will talk a little bit about Shabbat in Israel, and then we go to estimations, results, and discussion. So I don't think I have to convince you that religion has been playing a very, very important role in everyday life on a global scale in different countries. Wherever you look, religion is a big part of the society. And this despite that when in 1963, a prominent sociologist whose name is Gerard Lenski, he actually predicted that religion is doomed to disappear in the era of science and enlightenment. Well, I was born in the Soviet Union. The Soviets also said there's no religion and religion is not important and so on and so on. But by communism, they created their own religion, which happened to fall after 70 and something years. And basically, 59 years after the prediction of Gerard Lenski, there was a survey, and it showed that 84% of the world population were still religiously affiliated. Now, in economics, we can think about several things where religion can play a role in decision making. So, for example, reward for effort and redistribution of taxes. In the paper by Bernabeu and Tirol, they actually discussed the role of religion in the redistribution of taxes, or governmental intervention, where more religious people are less likely, they like less when government intervenes. Cooperation, trust, honesty. More religious people maybe they are more honest than less religious people, but it's obviously depends on the context. Avoidance of addictive substances. More religious people are less addicted. Academic performance, vaccination, and so on and so on. Now, actually, the first, or maybe not the first, but Adam Smith, he laid the foundation for the economic analysis of religion in his Wealth of Nations and the Theory of Moral Sentiment. But for many years, economists neglected, by the way, they not only neglected religion, but many other things. But for many years, economists did not write about it. But then in 1988, Jan Kone, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, he wrote an introductory paper on the economics of religion. And since then, the literature on economics of religion is becoming, like many economists, more and more of economists, they publish papers on economics of religion. There are several papers in Journal of Economic Literature since 1988. Moreover, recently, Economic Journal and JIBO, they publish special issues on the economics of religion. So this field is becoming more and more a field that attracts more and more economists. Unfortunately, one topic that received less attention in this literature is the intersection of leisure and religion. And I find it very surprising because there's a fundamental question, economic question, about the substitution effect between let me see, it's my cursor, was a bit noisy. So there is an economic question about substitution effect. If I go to religion activity, I may less go to leisure activities that has nothing to do with religion. And actually, there is a study there is a journal called Review of Religious Research, RRR. They publish a lot about religion, obviously. So they suggest that secular leisure activities are substitute for religious activities, which is not surprising. And the substitute relationship between religious and non-religious activities is the likely reason why many governments have protected religious worship by introducing laws that prohibited leisure activities such as professional sports. And the best example is the so-called Sunday Observance Act that was introduced in 1780. So, for example, English football, as we know now, so Sunday games were banned in English football up to 1974 due to this Sunday Observance Act. And this act prohibited the use of any building or room for public entertainment or debate on a Sunday. And I was greatly surprised when I realized what was the reason why this ban was lifted. And this happened because of the Yom Kippur War in 1973 between Israel and the Arab neighbors, another war in that area. And the Arab members of OPEC, they kind of introduced embargo of oil against countries that supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War. And therefore, it was very difficult to play in the evenings because there was no much oil, no much gas. On top of it, there was a strike of miners in February 1974, and the Football Federation asked, the English Football Federation asked the government to allow playing on Sundays, and that was exactly the moment when the English government said, okay, that's fine. The British government said that that's fine and you can play on Sundays. So up to 1974, there were no games on Sundays in England. In Northern Ireland, the ban was only relaxed in 2008 and only if both teams agree to play on Sunday. So both teams have to agree that that's fine for them to play on Sunday, and only then the match can take place on Sunday. In the States, Sunday games are illegal for more than 100 years, but there was a very nice study by Kragun and the co-authors, and they found that early Sunday games of a local American football team significantly reduced religious service attendance. And again, this is kind of evidence of this substitution effect between Sunday worship and the sports attendance. Now, while other papers looked at the religious service attendance, in this paper we take a different approach, and we want to see how a religious holiday may affect stadium attendance in football games. Now, just to be humble in terms of what is football, football is probably less important than religion, although some people consider that this is a religion, and we know the examples in Argentina when they have this church named after Diego Maradona. But still, football is very, very important in society. It has the power to unite people after important wins, as was found in the paper by De Patrice Chauvin and co-authors when they asked people in Africa, when they showed that after big wins, people are more associated with the big country rather than with the small tribe. Or to be a catalyst for war, as we know, there was even the war called the football war between El Salvador and Honduras, if I'm not mistaken. And if we to believe to FIFA numbers, then approximately 5 billion people around the world engaged with the 2022 FIFA World Cup. I'm always curious how do they count these numbers. Okay. And another quote by Pope John Paul II, he said once that amongst all unimportant things, football is by far the most important. So, and we like this statement. So what are we doing in this paper? We actually investigate the effect of playing on Shabbat, which is the holy Jewish day, on attendance in the Israeli Premier League, so-called Ligat Ha'al in Hebrew, the top tier in Israeli football. Now, a little bit about Shabbat, because I guess not too many people are familiar with the Shabbat here in the audience. So in Christianity, the holy day is Sunday. This is the rest day. And in Judaism, it is Shabbat. And Shabbat, many people they think it's Saturday, but that's not exactly the case. Shabbat is observed from a few minutes before the sun sets on Friday evening until the appearance of 3 stars in the sky on Saturday evening. So basically, Shabbat starts today in 3 hours or 2 hours, something like this. Now, the main aim of Shabbat is to exercise freedom from everyday activities and commemorate God's creation of the universe on the 7th day of which God rested from his work. And according to the Jewish religion, it is strictly forbidden to work on Shabbat. So back in the days in Bible or in Torah, there were really harsh punishment if somebody violates Shabbat. But these days it's less strict. But over the years, even before 1948, which is the year when the State of Israel was established, there were heated debates and sometimes violent debates over observance of Shabbat in Palestine. Back in the days, it was called British Mandatory Palestine. So, for example, in 1934, violent clashes broke there over the break of Shabbat observance. And then the British who ruled the entire area, he addressed the religious Jews as follows. I really like this quote. "You may be religious and try to obtain a place in paradise, but you have no right to disturb those people who are ready to proceed to hell." So this is a very nice quote. These days we have those debates. And of course, there is a wider debate about Shabbat in general, because we have a problem like public transportation is banned and so on and so on. We will discuss it later. And another example by Rabbi Avraham Isaac Kook, who served as the Ashkenazi chief rabbi of the Jewish community. So we have Ashkenazi and Sephardic. Like we have 2 chief rabbis in Israel. So he said, okay, no problem, I will approve football games on Shabbat under the condition that it did not violate the rules of rest on Shabbat. But of course, it's not possible to have sports activities like football games without violating the rules of Shabbat. And after he realized this, he asked the Zionist institutions back in the days in 20s and 30s to prevent sports on Shabbat. Obviously, they did not listen to him. Now, disagreement about Shabbat observance between religious and secular Jews continued also after the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. And here we have to understand something. It's a very, very explosive topic, games on Shabbat. So I published last week or 2 weeks ago an article in a big Israeli website, and there were so many, the reactions were harsh, from, oh, that's so correct, to, oh, the guy is funded by religious movements. And okay, now we have to understand, Israel has no written constitution. So Israel is a country without constitution because of the religious reasons. And therefore we follow, everything is being followed by the so-called religious status quo. And this is an historical compromise between religious and secular camps in Israel. So this status quo arrangement is attributed to a letter dated June 47, sent by David Ben-Gurion, who later became the first prime minister of Israel, to the non-Zionist Orthodox Agudat Israel, a group, to gain their support for the Zionist cause several months before the UN vote on the partition plan of the British Mandatory Palestine in November 47. So he wanted the support of Orthodox Jews, and then he promised, so he kind of, in the letter, he broadly reassured the religious that the emerging state, the state of Israel, that will emerge, and it was established in May 1948, that the values of Judaism will be preserved. Okay, so those include 4 main topics. First is Shabbat would be the rest day. Kosher food would be served in government institutions. By the way, I learned a lot during, I didn't know all those things. I knew about status quo, but I didn't know the details. So again, Shabbat, kosher food, jurisdiction of Orthodox courts in personal issues, mainly marriage and divorce. So for example, there are some issues with this, and the Israeli society is not entirely happy with those things, but this is what it is. So despite the fact that, so you can marry in Israel only if both are Jewish. If one of the people is not Jewish, you cannot marry in Israel. You have to go outside, like to Cyprus, get married, and then the state of Israel recognize this marriage, as much as the state of Israel recognized marriage between 2 men or 2 women. So this is a very liberal country, but very religious. So this is really lots of controversies in that regard, lots of contrasts in that regard. And the last thing is the autonomy in religious education. So there are religious education, and again, lots of debates. So this religious status quo created heated debates for almost already 80 years. And just for you to understand what Shabbat means, so even today there is a ban on public transport on Shabbat, except for several places with large non-Jewish community. For example, Haifa is a place, city of Haifa is a place where there is public transport. And for example, there are also fines for operating business on Shabbat. So my mother lives in the city of Ashkelon. There is a big community of people who came to Israel from the former Soviet Union. And there are many places, stores that are open on Shabbat. So they are ready to pay those fines and to operate on Shabbat. So it's kind of, it's illegal, but everybody does it. Yeah. So as I said, on the one hand, very religious rules. On the other hand, for example, Israel has one of the biggest gay parades, and the only one in the Middle East. Go figure how does it work. So for many years, let's talk a little bit about sports and religion, because it has been really a hot topic in Israel. So for many years, activities in a variety of sports were held on Shabbat as part of the status quo. So people said, there is a status quo, leave us alone. We are allowed to play. But in several cases, the Israeli legal and political systems were required to review the issue of sports on Shabbat. So one such case was in 2009, where the High Court of Justice had to discuss the petition of a religious national youth fencing champion, Yuval Freilich, who represented Israel in the 2024 Paris Olympic Games, because he is a religious guy and he wanted to allow religious competitors to participate in national championships without violating Shabbat. And the High Court of Justice actually issued an interim order forbidding the tournament to be held on Shabbat. So fencing competitions for many years, it was not allowed to compete on Shabbat. Okay? So, and then the question is, okay, on the one hand, it's you force people to compete not on Shabbat. On the other hand, religious people cannot compete on Shabbat. So it's an impossible situation. No one is happy from what's going on. Another very, very famous example. So the first Olympic medal of Israel was in 1992. And then in 1988, there was two Israeli sailors, because Israel is good in sailing and judo, but two sailors. They missed out the first ever Olympic medal in 1988 Seoul Olympic Games because they had to compete during Yom Kippur, which is the holiday in Israel. Nothing works on that day. And the Israeli officials forbade them to compete. And that was the reason they finished fourth, because that race was missing from their points. So, and going back to football, there is these days a guy whose name is Gabi Kanikovsky. He is a player of the national team. He scored several goals for the national team. He observes Shabbat and plays for Maccabi Tel Aviv. Now, he travels to the away games of his Maccabi Tel Aviv team on Friday, not to violate Shabbat. So if the game is on Saturday, he goes to the city where they have to play, stays there in the hotel, and then comes to the game, not to violate Shabbat. And in the past, there were several other players who did the same, like Hen Ezra, David Revivo. If there are some people from Celta Vigo, I don't know, but his brother played for Celta Vigo. Okay, now in 2015, so you will understand now why I'm telling you all this. So in 2015, an Israeli court concluded that without the permission of the Minister of Economy, football games were a criminal offense, and it was not possible to play on Shabbat. So this is a big thing. And then the Attorney General at the time overruled this decision, claiming that football games should continue based on the status quo agreement on religious secular relations. Then again, in 2018, the Israeli government approved a general waiver permitting football players to play on Shabbat. And so there were kind of coalition agreements, so religious parties had something in return, and then they said, okay, you can play, but you give us something. So the usual political things. And why am I telling you all this? Because this is a super explosive topic. And I had discussions with the Israeli Professional Football League. I asked them for data. I just said, okay, could you please give me the data? This is what I'm asking. Very simple question. Do Shabbat games attract more or less people? And when they heard this research question, they said, no, and they told me, and if you find something we don't like, then what? I said, look, I'm a researcher. Whatever I will find. So they said, no. So they did not give us the data. We had to look for data from other sources. And then I also discussed this question with some people from Israeli football industry, and they said, "Oh, Alex, you are running into very problematic questions." But this is the question I investigate. Now, just one thing, like more general, just to say it's not only about Israel, and later on in the end I will discuss why it's not only about Israel, but this question on this relationship between leisure activities and Shabbat is not only important for Israel, but also for other countries with Jewish religion populations, such as United States, that has 6.3 million Jewish people, which is only second to Israel with 7.2 million Jews. And I would like to note the UK, and I really like what they do. They have roughly a bit more than 300,000 Jews. But they take the Shabbat issue, not only Shabbat, but also generally speaking, the religious issues very seriously, and the inclusion, and I really, really like it in the UK. So according to Rule B5 of the English Football Association, which relates to the games of youth teams, any club or league would be obliged to move fixtures on Shabbat if requested by a community to a more convenient time for anyone observing the Shabbat. So they really kind of help in that regard the Jewish people to enjoy football games and also to observe their religious requirement of Shabbat. Okay, so let's go and talk a little bit about Ligat Ha'al, Israeli Premier League. So this is the top men's football tab. So don't confuse with English Premier League. We are not as good, but we are improving. So it is the top men's tier in Israel, and they play from August to May. Since the 2012-13 season, it has 14 teams that has maintained the same tournament structure. I will discuss this a little bit later. The season divided into two phases. The first is regular season, 40 teams. Each team plays 13 games at home. In total, 26 rounds with home and away matches. At the end of the regular season, the top 6 ranked teams qualify for the championship playoff, which is organized as a double round robin tournament with 10 rounds. So you have 6 teams, 5 games at home, 5 games away. Total 10 games for each team. And teams ranked 7 to 14 at the end of the regular season play in the relegation playoff, which is organized as a single round robin tournament. So some teams play 4 games at home, some only 3 games. The winner of the championship qualifies for the UEFA Champions League qualification round. Second and third place in the years of investigation, they qualified for the UEFA Europa League. Now they go to Conference League. And the fourth place can also qualify to the European Cups, depending on the identity of the winner of the Israeli Cup. So basically, more or less similar to Norway, to any other country in Europe. And the 2 bottom ranked teams at the end of the relegation playoff relegated to the second tier of the Israeli football. Okay, so what did we do? We collected data on all games from 2012-13 to 2018-19 seasons. And why did we start?
Okay, is everyone else still there, or is my connection gone? Or has Alex
No,
disappeared?
I think it's Alex who's gone, and we're still here, I think. Can't get rid of
Really
us.
surreal experience. Thank you
Yeah,
for
it's
confirming
on
that I'm
to-
still here.
I think,
Who's to
Shabbat
blame,
just
right?
began, and so, external forces, made him sort of suspend the connection.
Yeah, he should be here. He's got another 6 hours or so before Shabbat starts. So it's
Where is he, in Norway?
yeah.
Yeah,
Norway, yeah, I don't know.
pretty lost internet.
So
try
Shabbat
and be
starts at
done.
6:31 on Friday, March 21st in Norway.
But that's 3 hours away. Is it 2
Yeah.
hours? 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock there now. So 2.5 hours. He's going to try and join with his phone. I don't know what that means for his slides, but
I can talk about the Israeli Football League for a bit while we are waiting.
why not? If someone knows about it.
I think that Alex mischaracterized it as saying that it's improving.
Optimistic was that? I don't know.
Well, I guess relative to when, I guess is.
Yeah, it at some point it improved, but then I think progress seems to have slowed down.
But the Israeli, was it one of the youth teams reached the final of?
Yeah. They were in the Olympics last year.
I've just got
They
Alex
reached
calling.
They reached the semi-final of the U20 World Cup.
James, does Alex know that
you're back?
As you can see, the topic is very explosive. Someone really doesn't want me to talk about it. Okay, so something happened to internet in my office, but now we are back. So let's pretend nothing happened. Let's see. Sorry for that. But by the way, did everyone run out of, or it was only me?
I think it was just you. I had this really surreal moment where I didn't know whether it was you or whether it was me.
Yeah. Anyway,
everyone reassured me it was you rather than me. So
yeah. Well, let me.
so yeah.
Okay.
Ahead,
let's continue. So can you see it now?
Yep.
Yeah. So apologize for. Okay, so we collected the data from 2012-13 season because it was the first season with 14 teams that played in the regular season, and later in the championship or relegation round, there was no halving the point. So there was a period of time where my team, Maccabi Haifa, lost the championship because they halved the point. So they played with 50% of points after the regular season. So starting from 12-13, they abolished this rule. And the last season was 2018-19 because this was the last full season before the COVID restrictions and the Gaza war that started in October 2023. So, which had an effect on everything, including football. Okay, so the data, given that the authorities of the Israeli Premier League did not give us the data, we had to look for data in other places. Fortunately, there are lots of places where the data were available. So we found the data on Transfermarkt. Now there were something like 11% of attendance statistics were missing. So we supplemented it partly from the Israeli website called one.co.il, sports site. We couldn't find data on attendance for 48 games, so there's nothing we could do. We also removed one game where the crowd was not allowed out of the remaining matches, and 2 games were rescheduled because of weather conditions, so we also removed them. And in total, we had more than 1,600 games. We also used data on betting odds from Odds Portal, data on air conditions, temperature, and rains from Open Meteo, and the exact kickoff time the Israeli kickoff time from sportswalla.co.il, because Transfermarkt had the European Central European time, so we had to be careful. We started with the Transfermarkt data, then we checked and we realized that the hours were not correct, so we went to sports to the Israeli website just to confirm that we were correct, and we changed it. And the time of Shabbat we found on Chabad.org. So this is the distribution of games by day of the week and Shabbat observance. So just for you to understand, do you see my mouse? Yeah, good. So
Yep.
Shabbat games. So on Saturday we have games within Shabbat, and on Saturday we also have non-Shabbat games, because Shabbat is over. Depends on the day, depends on the time of the year. But let's say 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 4 o'clock, depending if it's winter or summer. So we had games on Saturday which are on Shabbat and not Shabbat. And of course, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, by definition, are not Shabbat games. So this is the descriptives for each home team in our data. I must tell you, very simple. There is only one case of a team called Hapoel Petach Tikva, where the average attendance on Shabbat was higher than on non-Shabbat. Of course, this does not mean anything, right? Because it depends who are the opponent, depends how many points do you have, and so on and so on. But just as a summary statistics, we see that maybe something is going on. Only Hapoel Petach Tikva had more people on Shabbat than none on Shabbat. All the other teams, you can see that they have significantly more, significantly more higher attendance on non-Shabbat than on Shabbat. Another thing we have to see that, for example, a team called Beitar Jerusalem, they barely played on Shabbat. Most of their games they play on non-Shabbat. Beitar Jerusalem is associated with the right-wing politics, and they kind of, maybe they have more religious people and so on and so on. So they barely play on Shabbat. And we have to understand that to distinguish between the top 5 teams, which are Maccabi Haifa, Maccabi Tel Aviv, Hapoel Be'er Sheva, and Beitar Jerusalem. And we can see also, when we look at attendance, we see that there is a huge gap between those top 5 teams and all the others. Okay, so we have to understand that maybe those teams don't play on Shabbat that often as the other teams. This is attendance statistics by away teams on Shabbat and non-Shabbat. Again, we see that Beitar Jerusalem barely play on Shabbat. Now, this is descriptive statistics of variables for Shabbat and non-Shabbat games. So just for you to see, there is selection. We cannot just compare attendance on Shabbat and non-Shabbat. So for example, stadium capacity, we see that on average, there are larger stadiums on non-Shabbat games than on Shabbat games. Also, we see significantly more games between the big 5 teams on non-Shabbat compared to Shabbat. Also, we see teams are higher valued on non-Shabbat game than on Shabbat games. Also, we see that their temperature differs. This is easy to explain because on Shabbat they usually play before 4 o'clock, before 5 o'clock. So it's higher temperature on these games. So selection is an issue. Also, of course, the team's position, we see that there are kind of more attractive games on non-Shabbat than on Shabbat. So selection is an issue, and we will now refer to this. So a naive approach of correlating a dummy variable of playing on Shabbat with attendance would yield biased and inconsistent estimates because the allocation of games on Shabbat is not random. So we cannot just compare attendance on Shabbat and not on Shabbat. So, for example, individual teams' characteristics such as larger or smaller fan base, such as Beitar Jerusalem, that has one of the biggest fan bases in Israel. So this may play a role. Ongoing tournament achievements may play a role. Stadium capacities may play a role. And we will discuss whether or not to include the stadium capacity, but we'll discuss it later. So we needed to take the different sources of observed and unobserved heterogeneity into account. So this is what we estimate. Attendance as a function of Shabbat, stadium capacity, and of course, home and away team fixed effects. And we will discuss also whether to include or not to include stadium capacity, because some people don't like when stadium capacity is part of the demand equation, because they say it's a supply thing. So we will refer to this as well. And we also control for whether this is a game between each of two big five teams, or teams' market value, rainfall, air temperature, square temperature, team position before the game, points accumulated, distance between the team's locations, and so on and so on. So really, lots of things. If we are missing something, I'm happy that you say, Alex, you missed this. Even whether a team has ensured participation in the European competition in the next season, whether a team has already been relegated, and so on and so on. Okay, now
Alex.
Yes, yes.
You missed. Do you have information on, or is there variation in games being broadcast on sort of public, the regular TV as opposed to the pay-per-view channels?
So obviously there is a variation, but depends what how do you refer to, given that Daniel is an Israeli guy, so I can speak with him in Israeli terms. Channel 5, is it what?
Channel 5 is a cable channel.
Is okay, but all the games are broadcast either on Channel 5 or on Charlton. And there were periods of time that one game per week, which was on Monday, was broadcast on channel, like a governmental channel. So all the games are broadcast. Every game is broadcast.
Right, but the access to some of these channels may vary. I mean, I guess that
So Saturday games are basically, I don't remember, maybe there was one or two games, just not to say zero games, that were broadcast on Shabbat. Maybe the game when Maccabi Haifa lost the championship against Bnei Yehuda in 2012, but it was before this data.
Okay.
I don't remember whether there are games broadcast on public channel on Shabbat. Monday for sure. There was a period of time where like the Israeli BBC broadcast those games, but on Shabbat, basically no. Okay, so of course we will use the Tobit estimator, and we set, it's always tricky, what's the upper limit? We set it at 95% of the stadium capacity. Now, one problem with Tobit could be that this may, when we use fixed effect with Tobit estimator, this may lead to an incidental parameters problem, unless T, which is the number of games per fixed effect, is large. And what is large? So we use this green paper in the Econometric Journals in 2004. So, of course, the variance of this estimator is biased, but this bias diminished fairly rapidly with the increase in T, with maximal of T equals to 20. And in our case, we have 20 teams with an average of 40 games at home and 40 games away. So we use home fixed effects, away fixed effects, away team fixed effects. So the T is relatively large. So it seems that this bias is not a big concern in our settings if we rely on the findings of Green in 2004. And let's go to results. So we start with, So we start with just simple correlation between Shabbat games and stadium attendance, and we find that there is 53% higher attendance on not Shabbat than on Shabbat, or 53% fewer people come to games on Shabbat compared to non-Shabbat. Then we control for stadium capacity, because we saw that stadium capacity differs between Shabbat and non-Shabbat, and we already see a reduction in the size of the coefficient. Then we control for stadium dummies, home and away team dummies, season dummies, pace of the season dummies, and the effect is already much smaller than 40%. So we have 11%, 12% fewer people come to games on Shabbat than on non-Shabbat. And then when we use set of additional controls, like whether this is a game between big five teams and so on, temperature, points, whatever. So the effect is 9.3%. The coefficient is 9.3%. We have 9.3% lower attendance on Shabbat than on non-Shabbat. Then we said, okay, let's use different subsamples and let's try to see whether we missed something. So here in column 1, we only used the 3 most frequent days, that is Sunday, Monday, and Saturday, which account for 96% of the total observations, and we find more or less the same result. Then in column 2, we excluded all the games with the big 5 teams. Yeah, these are the games in column 2 that are without big 5 teams. And so if big Maccabi Haifa played against Hapoel Ashkelon, it's not there, or another team. And the effect is there as well. Then column 3, we only took the regular season, the first part of the season, and the results are robust. Then we said, okay, let's only take Saturday games. Not Monday, not Sunday, not only Saturday games, because within Saturday, we have games that kick off before the end of Shabbat and games that kick off after the end of Shabbat. And we find that games on Shabbat, games that kick off during Shabbat, attract 14% fewer people. Then we said the following, okay, let's now cut the data into games that started only after the end of Shabbat and games that started only before the end of Shabbat. Maybe the kickoff time has to do something with attendance. And games that kick off after Shabbat, every minute that goes away from Shabbat, let's say Shabbat ends at 6 o'clock in the evening, so 6:01, 6:02, 6:03, every minute after Shabbat increases attendance by 5 percentage points. So to put this result into perspective, 60 minutes after the end of Shabbat, this game attracts 30% on average more attendance than the game that starts exactly when Shabbat ends. Okay. Now we looked at in column 3, we have only games that started before the end of Shabbat, and we have zero relationship between the kickoff time and the attendance. So whether the game starts at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, as long as it's within Shabbat, it doesn't affect the attendance at all. And for those of you who are not big fans of including, and I know Stefan is not a big fan of including a stadium capacity into attendance demand equation. So these are results without stadium capacity, and the results are more or less the same. All the 3 tables I showed you before, the results are robust, and the coefficient is more or less the same. Okay, so what we found is that Shabbat games attract significantly fewer fans than non-Shabbat games. Interestingly, the subsample of Saturday games, Shabbat attracts 40% fewer fans of games that start during Shabbat than games that start after the end of Shabbat within Saturday. And attendance is not responsive to kickoff time if the game is played during Shabbat, but it is responsive if the game starts after the end of Shabbat. Okay, so the farther you are from Shabbat, the more people come to see the game. So our results suggest that the new potential audiences, like families and children, so this is because this is the main argument of non-religious guys. And just to make sure I do not observe Shabbat, I'm not a religious person because I was accused that I am. Okay. So the main argument is that, of course, there should be more people on Shabbat because families with children are coming to attend games on Shabbat because this is the only free day in the week. In Israel, we only have one day, which is the rest day. This is Saturday. Schools, there are schools 6 days a week, from Sunday to Friday. So because families with children can attend, therefore, we believe that there should be more people on Shabbat. But no, those new potential audiences do not compensate for the loss of fans who cannot attend games during Shabbat. And by the way, they cannot attend games during Shabbat. It could be because they are religious. It could be because of other things. such as public transport on Shabbat, because there is no public transportation on Shabbat. So this could be also secular people who cannot attend games on Shabbat. But I don't have the possibility to do this analysis, but the anecdotal evidence. So average attendance of the two teams from Haifa, Maccabi Haifa and Hapoel Haifa, are much lower on Shabbat than on non-Shabbat. And why Haifa is an interesting case? Because Haifa has public transport on Shabbat. So again, it's not causal, but this is at least anecdotal evidence that it's not only about public transportation. I would be happy to have data on the distribution of fans who observe Shabbat, but unfortunately there is no such data available. And the fact that 27% of Israeli Jews observe Shabbat, and some of them are football fans, or even players, as I showed you, indicates that it's not simply a lack of public transport that has a negative effect on attendance on Shabbat games. It has also to do with religious people who observe Shabbat and who are not able to attend the game on Shabbat. So the results of our paper suggest that let's take a team that has on average 4,000 fans on non-Shabbat games. So on average, they lose 10% of fans on Shabbat games. And if the ticket price is 100 shekels, which is something like $25, such a team loses income of 40,000 shekels, which is something like $11,000 per Shabbat games. Like, if we believe that the team, let's say a team plays 20% of its home games on Shabbat, so 6 games on Shabbat amount to a loss of 240,000 shekels, which is something like $66,000. And such a sum can easily be the annual salary of 2 or 3 young players, or an excellent addition to the club's youth or women's teams. So from a simple monetary point of view, it might make sense to reduce the number of Shabbat games. And we can see that there was a reduction in Shabbat games over the years. But there was in 21-22, there was a rebound up. But I don't think it's correct to look at this from the monetary point of view, because Shabbat games are much more than just Shabbat games. This is a symbol of freedom from religion, and no one wants to give up here. So Shabbat games represent, in my view, this is how I see it, and I will explain why I see it like that. They actually represent a symbol of a fragile agreement between the religious and secular camps in Israel, where it seems impossible to make a decision about Shabbat games that will satisfy all sides. And by having games on Shabbat, each side loses something. Religious fans are not able to attend the football games on Shabbat. Secular fans cannot use public transport to travel to these games, and the teams lose money. And as history shows, banning Shabbat games a la Sunday Observance Act is very unlikely to create peace between the camps. And talking about this, what the Israeli Football Association does, so what they did, they kind of followed the English example that I told you before. So they created, along with the NGO called Tzav Piyus, which is Reconciliation Order in Hebrew, they decided to allow youth teams with at least 7 players who observe Shabbat to play their games on other days. And the idea is, of course, to allow religious players to participate in the football games, the activity that they really like and enjoy. But the main objective, of course, is to bring both camps, religious and secular children, together to create reconciliation, dialogue, because Israel society is torn apart from too many topics, right, left, religious, secular, Jews, Arabs, and so on and so on. So this Tzav Piyus, this reconciliation order, hopefully will create peace between the camps. Now, but overall, generally speaking, our study highlights the importance of taking religious needs into account when organizing leisure activities, which is clearly not only valid for the Jewish religion. So, for example, sports competitions during Ramadan, they affect players because of the fasting. That's clear, right? But it's also possible that the willingness of Muslim fans to attend games may be affected. And this would be nice that future research, because I couldn't find anything about it, future research could investigate such relationship for both Muslim countries as well as for non-Muslim countries that have large Muslim communities. So how attendance in these games is affected during Ramadan. Okay. And it's also interesting to investigate the historical development of attendance on Sunday games in English football after 1974 and in Northern Ireland after 2008. This is probably to James. He has the data, so he can see this. It's also interesting to see how the religious worship is affected by introduction of these games. Is there more or less people that go to church? It's also an interesting question. And we would like to conclude by saying that religion is a very strong institution in people's lives, and it's very unlikely that it is doomed to disappear as predicted by many, not only the sociologists, but by many in the 20th century. So we must better understand the unique features of religion that may affect our decision-making in a variety of settings. And most importantly, I think we must try to accept the religious or secular nature of others, the religious or secular preferences of each other. And Israeli football, in my view, is a good example of this fragile relationship in which each side sacrifices something for people to live in peace with each other. So thank you very much. And given that soon we are there, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you very much, Alex. I am giving you a team's round of applause. That was a really interesting talk. As you highlighted, it's something that I found particularly interesting. And you know, I've talked about the games on Sunday in England, which obviously have quite a different nature to them, and obviously all sorts of differences. But that's for another time. We've got lots of time for questions and comments, and so I will open the floor to anyone who would like to ask Alex a question. And first there was Gidon.
Yeah, Gidon.
Followed by Bernd and Daniele.
Gidon, we can't hear you.
Sorry, hear you. Yes. Thank you very much for the interesting talk. And I am a bit familiar with this industry, we'll call it, in Israel. My question is, from my familiarity with this, is there's the one team, Sachin.
Yeah.
And do we find with them a preference in terms of attendance on Saturdays, for instance? But I'd also wonder in terms of rivalries. So taking the case of the Jerusalem team that has a strong rivalry with Sachin, would that in any way impact attendance on a Saturday match, for instance, in your opinion, if they were playing them? In other words, does the religious, cultural conflict associated with an increased attendance that might reduce the impact of the Sabbath, say?
Well, thank you, Gidon. First of all, thank you for asking a question, because we discussed it and you were kind of now you ask the question. That's not, and you are a fan of Hapoel Jerusalem, if I'm not mistaken.
In basketball, yeah. In soccer,
okay.
I grew up a bit of a Beitar Jerusalem, and then I decided I don't want to be associated with them so much.
Okay. So first of all, this is Bnei Sachin. Again, this is nothing we can conclude from this, but just the average attendance of Bnei Sachin home games is higher on non-Shabbat than on non-Shabbat. Just for people who is not familiar, Bnei Sachin as a team is an Arab team with Jewish players, of course, in Israel. And there is a rivalry between Sachin and Beitar Jerusalem. But again, I don't think it would affect the result, because how many such matches do you have in total? And when they play away, Bnei Sachin, they 5,597 on Shabbat, 513, more or less the same, but a bit more on Shabbat actually, when they play away. So this could affect, I don't know, but I don't think it will affect the result, because how many such matches do you have in the data? So we did not include this rivalry into the estimation. Yeah.
Great. Next is Bernd.
Thanks, Alex. Great presentation, as usual. I have 2 points. There is one fascinating paper that was published in Science a few years ago, and the title is Building Social Cohesion Between Christians and Muslims Through Soccer in Iraq. I don't know whether you know the paper, but
I know.
Yeah, okay. So that was point number one. Second point is the economics of religion demonstrates that the religious affiliation of people has decreased over time. So have you perhaps thought about estimating your model separately for the first and the second half of the observation period? It might be that you find different effects because the data that you cited to document the importance of religion is not that new. So the figures you presented were from 2012.
Yes.
Things might have changed since then. Perhaps not in Israel, I don't know, but in Germany for sure.
In Israel, for sure, they changed, and if they changed it in favor of more religious people, because more religious people, the fertility rate is simply higher. So if they changed, it changed kind of in favor of not playing on Shabbat.
Okay.
But generally speaking, I'm not sure that, because I read many now papers on economics of religion, and they all claim, they start with the claim that over the years, religious affiliation has reduced, but that's not true. That's how they write it. And there are lots of evidence that this is actually not true. That's what they claim. But I know the claim from both sides.
Well, I'm familiar with the figures for Germany, and church attendance on Sundays has dramatically declined over the last years. And the number
over the 100 years for sure, but
no, over the last 10 to 20 years in Germany, for sure. And the number of church exits has increased dramatically.
On the other hand, I believe that the number of entries into mosques, for example, for Muslim population, has increased over the years. Mm. But again, I don't know. We are running into explosive topic here, right? Yeah. Okay. So Daniele.
Yeah, go on, Daniele.
So a few comments. First of all, I'm not sure that putting it as a contrast between football and religion is the right way, because football, of course, is religion, and so it's not obvious that it should be a substitution. But okay,
just may I stop you? I have to say something about Daniele. I must say it. He actually, the reason of course, my PhD advisors as well, but I saw his post on RSSF website when I did my master's degree, and he was probably a student at Harvard that time, PhD student, and he wrote about
he's gone again.
Did we lose Alex? All right, so that's good. I think these superior forces that shut down Alex at critical moments. They are.
Yeah, he's definitely gone, hasn't he? He's messaged me to say not again.
I'll say that what I mentioned earlier about Sachin is interesting. Someone who grew up in Jerusalem, it was interesting that some religious people actually would go to matches and they would walk there and find their way in.
That was actually one of my questions, whether is it allowed if I don't use public transport, if I don't use sort of cars or things or or buses, and I don't pay, I have a season ticket, so I don't have to pay cash. Can I actually attend a match on Shabbat?
Technically, you could attend a match if you didn't have to have any kind of transaction of any kind or electronic ticketing or aspects like that. You could do that. And as I said, some people have done it.
I mean, of course, the what people consider observing Shabbat varies, right? And so some people say, well, I don't use the car, but I will go through the electronic gates at the football stadium. So
yeah, and as I said, there were certain matches where you knew that they would show up. So in the Jerusalem team, the interesting thing is there's also like, so these clubs have like the ultras and certain fan bases that are often extreme and violent, etc. Some of them, but in Jerusalem, say a lot of people are members of that who are religious, and they will attend matches on the Sabbath by walking or whatever.
Right.
So, but not families as much. You know, these are certain people who still show up, and especially when they're playing a club like Sakhnin, which has a lot more safety measures related to it as well. But I'll let Alex, he's back on. So.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay.
So I just had to give credit to Daniele about my career.
Okay, well, thank you. I guess I should take credit because your career has been very successful. So, all right. So, here are my questions. I was wondering, whether I'm curious about sort of the demand by religious people and sort of, less religious people. And I was just saying that, there's a whole spectrum of what sort of being, religiously observant mean and what kind of, things you do and don't do on Shabbat. But, could you, I was wondering, you have information on, say, the share of votes for religious parties at the local level. That should be some data that's relatively easy to see. And I would be, curious to see if, you have team fixed effects, but if you replace the team fixed effects with that variable, would it pick up, anything that, in places where there's, use this proxy for the share of, religious people, do you see, bigger or smaller, differences between Shabbat and non-Shabbat games? I think that's something that could be easily done. Yeah, other small comment on sort of the the regressions. You have this fairly big drop in the coefficients when you move from the specification with no controls or with just a limited set of controls to including all of the team characteristics, and that makes one worry. Well, if you had some additional controls, maybe they would go down to 0. So if I understand correctly, you have team fixed effects. So you have a, Beitar Jerusalem.
I have Beitar Jerusalem home fixed effects, and I have Beitar Jerusalem away fixed effects.
But do you have Beitar Jerusalem home in year 26, 2017 fixed effects? I would like to see interaction of team fixed effects with season fixed effects, because maybe Beitar Jerusalem in 2016 they're very good, and that there's a lot of attendance, and people go on Shabbat and not on Shabbat, and maybe not. That's an easy thing to do, and
yeah. I think for what it helps, and I think it does help, we do control for each team's value, transfer mark value. So having Beitar Jerusalem and team's value already kind of captures their abilities in that year and year's fixed effect.
Right, but I would like to see the interaction. You're right. So maybe Beitar Jerusalem was really poor in one year, and then rich owner comes along, or vice versa. Rich owner sells the team and runs away from the country, and but you could sometimes sometimes overperform their their transfer value and or underperform.
Because it's not only transfer value, it's also the number of points before each match of Beitar Jerusalem we have within that season. So in a way, we capture the ability of Beitar Jerusalem in any given match when they play at home and when they play away.
Okay. It's not difficult to do, so
no.
Try it, but yeah. And yeah, I have another small comments. I'll just send them to you by email. But one, just when you estimate the monetary loss for playing on Shabbat, that seems a little bit too high, because a profit maximizing club would adjust their ticket prices, and so if demand is actually lower on Shabbat, I would
I'm not sure about lowering the price will increase the revenue. First of all, I'm not sure what's the elasticity, but it seems, and Stefan will probably have something to say about it, But I would guess, with all the endogenous problems there, endogeneity problems there, that it's highly inelastic, the demand for tickets. And if it's highly inelastic,
but not perfectly inelastic.
No, but if even a bit inelastic, a bit less than -1 or towards 0, mathematically I should say higher than -1, then by reducing the price, you will not increase revenues.
Well, then they're doing something weird, because this is like a different question. Maybe know more than I do, but why is pricing not on the elastic part of the demand curve? It should be.
But again, it's close to impossible to say. It's close to impossible to calculate the elasticity. We discussed this like several weeks ago in James' paper. So it's a tough question, really.
Okay, I'm sorry I missed that talk. I'll look it up. Anyway, I would expect that whatever the optimal or suboptimal pricing strategy, people may adjust their prices to demand. And so, they're just taking the simple, difference in revenue is that can be overstating the actual loss. That's it. I'll send you some additional comments by email.
Thank you.
Stefan is next.
Yeah, after my last rant, I'm not saying anything about elasticity of demand. I'm just going to steer clear of that. But I did want to build on Daniela's point, I think, which is the way I would frame it is which I don't think you discussed very much, was the actual scheduling procedure of the league. So I have no idea about how this works in Israel, but I know that in the Premier League, this is quite a complicated process, the English Premier League. And the idea that the game is fixed in time absolutely is not quite right. I mean, these games can change in time and place even after the beginning of the season. And the initial scheduling problem, which is actually a very interesting statistical problem, is something that you usually have a fairly high-powered individual who is responsible for doing that. And one thing you might think about doing is actually contacting them and asking if they maybe they won't discuss talking to you either, but they might do. Because it strikes me that, I mean, the obvious point here is that if you think there might be a loss of audience on Shabbat, then you schedule the crappy games for Shabbat, right? I mean, and that's perfectly plausible strategy for the league as a whole. So it's not actually that fewer people turning up because it's Shabbat. It's actually because they're just crappy games that have been put on Shabbat, and that might reduce your effect. Because the other thing that strikes me is that you might want to try to. And you were just talking about this, and I didn't really follow this, but what the controls are you have in the paper for the team quality and so on. So I would think that probably the best thing to do would be to put in, following James, the ELO rating of the two teams from the prior games. Because clearly, attractive games are going to be, strong teams will attract, strong home teams and strong away teams will attract higher numbers of fans. And so you want to control for that kind of effect. There's a bunch of things you could do here. So one other thing is something I'm very fond of and I think would work really well in your framework would be the cumulative number of surprise points of the home team up to that point in the season, and perhaps for the away team. Surprise in every time I've used surprise points, it's incredibly significant in almost anything, right? It just is such a powerful explanatory variable for interest in a game or success in a game that I think you could try that. And then the other thing to say is, I don't think you really didn't get the impression you controlled for the championship significance of the game. And that's been a huge, I mean, actually going back to the 1980s, some of the earliest literature in football actually looked very carefully at whether the game mattered for championship, promotion, relegation, all these kind of things, qualification for Europe or whatever it might be. And so that's something else that I would think you should consider controlling for.
Okay, thank you very much. So regarding controls that you asked, you didn't follow what was there. So I controlled for, of course, except for the fixed effects for home and away teams, is whether this is a match between the big five, the team market value at the beginning of the season, team position in the standings before the game, points accumulated by the team prior to the game. Okay, betting odds, that's less.
Oh. Sorry, I missed that then. I didn't see you share those things. So do they matter?
No, I don't remember. We just say we control for. I don't remember. I didn't even look at them.
Well,
why do I care? But I can look now.
So smell test. Do they look sensible?
No, they look. Well, I lied to you. They look sensible. No, they looked sensible.
Okay. I still say surprise points would be good. But
yeah. But I believe that for that Michael Lechner would have said we're not in the belief business. But when it comes to controlling for ability, of course there are always better ways to do it. But regarding the scheduling, for example, last week, Hapoel Beersheva, which is the first place in the league these days, they played the Shabbat game. And Beitar Jerusalem this year, they played more Shabbat games, and they're in the. Actually, Hapoel Beersheva played several Shabbat games so.
Well, okay. Here's a test for you then. You as you say, you've got the transfer mark values at the beginning of the season, right? So predict what are going to be the most attractive games based on the transfer mark value, and then see whether there's any tendency to for Shabbat games to be amongst the less attractive games. That's a very simple test that you could do.
I'm pretty sure that is the case, Stefan.
Clearly there is selection, no question about it. There's no question.
Yeah, it's just like in England, like the TV games, the matches that are in the the top slots.
Okay, so what do you?
But he's supposedly controlling for all these things.
So is this a supply or demand argument then? I mean, is this that they're not scheduling the games, they're scheduling less attractive games, or is it that people don't want to go to a game on Shabbat? I mean, it's kind of, these are two different stories, right?
I'm going to add another question to that, is back to the transportation aspect, is people's ability to go to matches, and add to that attendance is that we're not differentiating between home attendance and away attendance, that if less people can travel on Shabbat to away matches, say, because there are unless you have a private car, then we don't know if the drop in attendance is the home attendance or away attendance, perhaps, adding on to that aspect of the limitations that Shabbat brings with it that might hinder. So that would be my question on top of that, is when we look at the drop of attendance and the religious factor, if that's the argument, if Beitar Jerusalem are playing a team from Haifa, say, then the fans can only travel if they have cars. There's no other way to get to Jerusalem with public transportation. So maybe Beitar's home attendance is the same, but there's less away attendance, and that's what's impacting the change that we're seeing in attendance. So I think there's still a religious factor in here to say, in terms of national imposition in attendance and how that might be impacting aspects of it. So I think, Stefan, that's part of the question. I think that relates to everything else. And then broadcasted on TV. If it's difficult for me to get to a match and it's on TV anyways, then maybe I will just choose to watch it on TV, or go to a friend who has it on because my family won't let me turn the TV on at home, so I'll watch it at a friend's house. But that's why I'm curious to know, is the home and away attendance, which one of them is actually causing the greater impact of change?
Yeah, but that's impossible to have without data. We don't have data on the split, and I don't think so. They claim they have the data. The Israeli, what they are called, not the Football Federation, but the one that once ran the league, but they don't give it to us. That's one. And second, how precise can it be? So I don't know, Beitar Jerusalem against Maccabi Petach Tikva, they will have the entire stadium of Beitar Jerusalem, but the tickets that they sell to Beitar Jerusalem fans are very limited, but you see the entire stadium Beitar Jerusalem.
No, but you know, Alex, what you could do is you actually showed this table at the very beginning, just the raw statistics of the, you know, home and away attendance, like, you know, sorry, Shabbat and non-Shabbat attendance for home teams. You also very quickly flashed a table that had Shabbat and not Shabbat attendance for away teams. You could easily put, like, you know, estimate the regression with, you know, interaction of team fixed effects with the Shabbat dummy, right? And so after controlling for all of the, you know, schedule, sort of, you know, weather, you know, day of the week, position in the table, transfer market, et cetera, you know, which are the teams that have, in terms of home attendance, you know, still a significant Shabbat gap, and which are the teams that, you know, what about away attendance? Because you're right, you know, I think, you know, there's Beitar, which is a popular team, has also high away attendance because a lot of, you know, there are a lot of Beitar fans everywhere, and so they travel to the game. But, you know, the ones in Jerusalem, you know, they can't travel, at least the ones that are, you know, observant cannot travel on Shabbat. So you could calculate a team specific, you know, Shabbat gap for both home and away teams. And I think that would be informative.
So, but in that regard, regarding your previous comment about having this share of voters for each city, when I think about it, like Beitar Jerusalem, the fans are all around the country. So how?
Yeah, but true, but they're mostly in Jerusalem.
Did you include?
I mean, it's a
distance?
property. It's not perfect, but I think it's, you know,
Was distance a variable in the model?
Sorry?
Was distance a variable?
Yes, we control for distance between the cities. Yes.
So again,
but
you could then have
small country. Distance. I have it now. I have the regression in front of me just for you. So where is it?
But what would happen with the distance interaction on Shabbat and not Shabbat, say, to see if that changes?
Distance was. Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's the thought. But I'm still confused. Are you saying that this is the outcome of, you know, religious preferences in the scheduling department, or is this religious preferences of the fans? That's what I'm looking.
I will be very general here. This is the effect of Shabbat on attendance. You are asking about mechanism, which I cannot. Well, this is the effect of Shabbat on attendance. I cannot say what's the mechanism.
I think this is an interesting perspective.
Could be transportation. No. The mechanism could be transportation. The mechanism could be religious people that cannot attend. I just don't have the data. It's impossible to answer this question.
If the objective of the league is to increase popularity and get people into stadiums, or perhaps it's not. Perhaps it's let's increase the number of people watching it on television instead, at which point I think, Stefan, if that's the point, is asking that, we don't know how they're deciding when matches are being played, but which one are they preferring? And therefore are they saying, well, you know what, if 500 less people go to a Beitar Jerusalem match on the Sabbath versus, say, on a Sunday, but 1,000 more people are going to watch it on television, then do we care about that as much, or which one do we care more about?
But there's
that shape things. Yeah.
There's another thing, Gideon. They want to maximize the popularity, subject to keeping things quiet, because this is a super explosive thing. I've talked to many people in Israel. The non-religious part of my friends, they were not entirely happy with the result. I must tell you, it's because they say, oh, it's too much religion, and now you want to take from us also the Shabbat games. And this is a very political point, because actually the Minister of Finance, Smotrich, which is the kind of far-right guy and religious guy, he actually said there is less people on Shabbat. And the entire media laughed about him. They said, no, that's wrong. And every Shabbat, I see articles on media that look how people like Shabbat. So this is a very political question. And last week, for example, they said, oh, game of Hapoel Beersheva, look how many people came to Shabbat. People clearly like the games of Shabbat. And I compared the attendance of this match when Hapoel Beersheva was in the first position of the league after the regular season with the same situation in several years ago. This was the lowest attendance compared to the other games when they were first straight away after the regular season.
By the way, something to note about the Israeli league that's interesting is that they have a system in place of the playoff kind of system. So towards the end of the season, it's only the top clubs are playing each other. So they don't have sort of less important matches.
But it's even though what you find is let's take it as valid. It's not clear that the policy implication is to cancel all Shabbat games, because then you have a scheduling thing. So the games that you can play on Shabbat afternoon, you cannot play on Sunday afternoon because it's a work day, and people will not come at all, right? So then you have to lump the schedule with a lot of games on Saturday evening and Sunday evening, and of course there are TV, so you do want to stagger the games across the weekend, so to maximize TV viewership.
And I believe this is the least of the problems, because basketball, this is what they did. There are no games on Shabbat in basketball. They moved everything to Sunday and Monday. So it's called, I have a friend in Israel who's a journalist. He said basketball is a game for religious people because they can watch the games. But
they're also competing with football.
Yeah, that's right. But the biggest problem is, now imagine they say no more games on Shabbat. This will create a huge chaos in the Israeli society because of this, because this is a very explosive topic. And many people will not like it. We have enough kind of problems to deal with in Israel, and this would create a problem, clearly, if they will say, and we say it explicitly in the paper, we do not recommend, we are not in a position to recommend reducing or increasing the number of games of Shabbat. We just answer an empirical question, which is also complicated. There are less people on Shabbat.
So I guess my last question to this, I have to go to another call, unfortunately, is the matches that are on Shabbat have lower attendance, but is that strictly because of the Sabbath, or is it also the quality of the match that isn't as interesting as Sunday's matches, say?
We hope we control for the quality of the match by lots of things, and we believe that we do capture the quality. Who are the teams? What are their positions? And so on and so on. Moreover, with this combination of games that start before the start of Shabbat, compared to games to start after the end of Shabbat, within Saturday, or games that start longer after Shabbat, they attract significantly more people than games that start early after Shabbat. So it may say something maybe about public transportation, but also about the religious people who have no time to come to the beginning of the game. So the later the game starts after the end of Shabbat, the more people come there. Controlling for those quality measures.
I mean, I can't say statistically. Like I said, growing up there, yes, I know people who would not go to matches on the Sabbath because of religious reasons. So somewhat we know that's a very likelihood. What we don't know is how many people couldn't go because of public transportation, I guess, but we don't have a way to know that. So.
No. But this is one of the effects of Shabbat.
Maybe we should put a mechanism, some kind of test to put in special rides to matches on the Sabbath.
Haifa is a nice example. Again, I didn't run regressions there. It's just very anecdotal evidence. Both teams attract more attendance on non-Shabbat than on Shabbat. And Haifa has public transportation. but there's no public
Right,
transportation.
but Haifa fan base, a lot of Haifa fans also come from outside of Haifa. So Israel's also a very small country, right? So we're talking distances of 30 minutes, not hours upon hours of driving or etc. So
yeah, 1
there
hour
are ways
from
of getting around.
Yeah, well,
Alex, are there matches on holidays that are not Moed, like Hanukkah and Purim?
we didn't look at it.
So there are some holidays in the Jewish calendar. There are holidays, but you are allowed to travel and go to football matches. It's probably a small number, but I just wonder if there's enough data that you can look at.
Yeah, Hanukkah, they usually draw a lot of people because they make a festival out of it and they'll light candles and hand out donuts to all the fans as an incentive, maybe.
Okay,
we are approaching Shabbat, right, James? We're approaching Shabbat, so we have
exactly. We've reached our allotted time, so thank you, Alex, for a really interesting paper, and thank you everyone for your discussions. We will stop now. I will remind you that we've got submission deadlines coming up, so do make sure you apply before they pass. So you email Frank Stevenson if you want to submit a paper for the Southern Economic Association's sports economics meetings. And there's a couple of deadlines at the end of March, start of April. See your reminder if you want more information on those. We'll be back next week. Next week, we are going to have Raphael Flepp from the University of Zurich presenting Surprise and Suspense in European Football. So wish you all a great weekend and a great Shabbat. Should that be your
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
And see you all next week. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.